The phone call that saved Frank Sinatra's life came at 3 a.m. on November 18, 1953. Ava Gardner was in her London hotel room when an overwhelming feeling of dread made her pick up the telephone and call Frank's apartment in New York. When Frank answered, his voice was slurred and distant in a way that terrified her. "Ava, why are you calling so late?" "Frank, are you all right? You don't sound like yourself." "I'm fine, baby. Just tired. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. Frank Sinatra, at the lowest point of his career and personal life, had taken an overdose of sleeping pills. If Ava hadn't called when she did, if she hadn't trusted her instincts and immediately called for help, the world would have lost one of its greatest entertainers. This is the untold story of the darkest night in Frank Sinatra's life, and how the woman he loved most saved him from himself. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. 1951-1953. The decline. By November 1953, Frank Sinatra's life had collapsed in ways that seemed impossible for someone who'd once been the most famous entertainer in America. His marriage to Nancy had ended in bitter divorce. His recording career was dead. Columbia Records had dropped him. His film career was non-existent. His voice, damaged by emotional stress, was unreliable. Most painfully, his relationship with Ava Gardner, the great love of his life, was in ruins. Frank had met Ava in 1949 when she was married to Mickey Rooney, and he was still married to Nancy. Their attraction was immediate and overwhelming. Ava was everything Nancy wasn't: glamorous, sophisticated, sexually magnetic, and completely unpredictable. Their affair had destroyed Frank's marriage and damaged both their careers. But Frank believed Ava was worth any sacrifice. He divorced Nancy in 1951 and married Ava that same year, convinced they could build a life together. Instead, their marriage became a cycle of passionate reconciliations and explosive fights. Both had legendary tempers. Both were used to being the center of attention. Both were stubborn, proud, and unwilling to compromise. "Frank and Ava loved each other desperately," said a friend who knew them both. "But they were too much alike to live together peacefully. Every disagreement became a war." November 1953, the final fight. The end came during what should have been a romantic evening. Frank had flown to London, where Ava was filming Knights of the Round Table. He'd hoped they could reconcile and save their marriage. Instead, they had the worst fight of their relationship. The argument started over Frank's career problems, but quickly escalated into accusations, insults, and ultimatums. Ava blamed Frank for being possessive and controlling. Frank blamed Ava for caring more about her career than their marriage. "You don't want a husband," Frank shouted. "You want an audience. And you don't want a wife," Ava shot back. "You want a possession." The fight ended with Ava telling Frank she wanted a divorce. Not a separation, not a break, a divorce. She was done with their marriage, done with the constant drama, done with Frank. Frank flew back to New York devastated. The woman he'd sacrificed everything for had essentially told him he'd ruined his life for nothing. November 17th, 1953. The darkest day. Frank spent November 17th alone in his Manhattan apartment, drinking and reviewing the wreckage of his life. At 37 years old, he felt like a complete failure. His career was over. His voice was gone. His money was running out. His children from his first marriage barely spoke to him. And now Ava, the woman he'd convinced himself was his soulmate, was finished with him. Frank had always been prone to depression, but this was different. This was a complete loss of hope, a feeling that there was no point in continuing. That evening, Frank made a decision that seemed logical in his devastated state. If his life was over, he might as well end it officially. Frank gathered all the sleeping pills he could find in his apartment, prescription medications he'd been using to cope with insomnia and anxiety. He poured himself a large glass of whiskey and began taking the pills, one by one. "I felt like I had nothing left to live for," Frank would later tell close friends. "My career was gone. My love was gone. My purpose was gone. I just wanted the pain to stop." November 18th, 1953. 3 a.m. The call, 3,000 miles away in London. Ava Gardner woke up with an inexplicable feeling of panic. Despite their terrible fight, despite her anger at Frank, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ava had always been intuitive about people she loved, and every instinct was telling her that Frank was in danger. She called his apartment, not knowing what she would say, just knowing she needed to hear his voice. When Frank answered, Ava immediately knew something was terribly wrong. His speech was slurred, his thoughts were disjointed, and he sounded like he was saying goodbye. "Frank, what's wrong? You don't sound right." "I'm fine, baby. Just tired. Everything's going to be fine now." "Frank, have you been drinking? Have you taken anything?" There was a long pause. Then Frank's voice, barely audible. "Maybe some pills to help me sleep." "How many pills, Frank?" "I don't know. Enough." Ava's blood ran cold. She realized what was happening. November 18th, 1953. The rescue. Ava immediately called Frank's doorman and convinced him to check on Frank's apartment. Then she called Frank's friend Jimmy Van Hosen, who lived nearby. "Jimmy, you need to get to Frank's apartment right now. I think he's taken an overdose." Van Hosen rushed to Frank's building and found him unconscious on his couch, surrounded by empty pill bottles. He immediately called an ambulance. Frank was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, where doctors pumped his stomach and worked to stabilize his condition. For several hours, it was unclear whether he would survive. Ava, still in London, stayed on the phone with the hospital throughout the night, desperate for updates on Frank's condition. "I felt responsible," Ava later said. "I knew our fight had pushed him over the edge. I was angry at him, but I didn't want him to die. I loved him too much for that." November 19th, 1953. The recovery. Frank regained consciousness the next afternoon, confused and embarrassed. When he realized what had happened, that Ava's phone call had saved his life, he was overwhelmed with gratitude and shame. "I wasn't trying to manipulate her or get attention," Frank later explained to friends. "I genuinely wanted to end the pain. But when I heard her voice, something in me wanted to live again." Ava flew to New York immediately, despite their marital problems. Whatever was wrong between them, she couldn't let Frank face this crisis alone. When she walked into his hospital room, Frank broke down crying. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize," Ava said, holding his hand. "Just promise me you'll get help." Frank spent a week in the hospital, not just recovering physically, but beginning to address the depression and despair that had nearly killed him. Doctors recommended therapy, which was stigmatized in 1953, but which Frank agreed to try. "That night taught me that no problem is permanent," Frank said years later. "No matter how bad things seem, they can change, but only if you're alive to see the change." December 1953-1954. The rebuilding. Frank's suicide attempt was kept secret from the press, but word spread quietly through Hollywood. The incident served as a wake-up call for Frank about his mental health and his need to find purpose beyond his relationship with Ava. Frank began working with a therapist to address his depression and develop healthier coping mechanisms. He also threw himself back into his career with renewed determination. The role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity came just 2 months after Frank's overdose. His desperation to rebuild his life gave his audition and performance an authenticity that couldn't be faked. "Frank's near-death experience changed him," said director Fred Zinnemann. "There was a depth to his acting that came from having faced real darkness and chosen to keep fighting. Ava and Frank's marriage didn't survive. They divorced in 1957. But their relationship evolved into a deep, lasting friendship. The crisis had shown them both that their love was real, even if their marriage wasn't workable. "We were too explosive together to stay married," Ava reflected years later. "But that night showed me how much we truly cared about each other. Frank knew I would always be there for him when it really mattered." 1954 or 1998. The lessons learned. Frank's suicide attempt remained one of the most closely guarded secrets in Hollywood, known only to a small circle of friends and family. Frank never spoke about it publicly, but he often credited that night with teaching him the importance of asking for help when life became overwhelming. Frank became a quiet advocate for mental health awareness, often helping friends and colleagues who struggled with depression. He understood from personal experience how quickly despair could become dangerous. "Frank had been through the valley of the shadow," said longtime friend Jilly Rizzo. After that, he never judged anyone else's struggles. He knew how close anyone could come to giving up. Frank's career renaissance in the mid-1950s was fueled partly by his gratitude for having survived his darkest moment. Every performance, every recording, every film was a gift he almost hadn't lived to create. His relationship with Ava, while never again romantic, remained one of the most important in his life. She was the person who had literally saved his life, and Frank never forgot that debt. When Ava died in 1990, Frank was too ill to attend her funeral, but he sent a simple message. "She saved my life in every way a person can be saved." The legacy. Frank Sinatra's suicide attempt and rescue remains one of the most powerful untold stories in entertainment history. It illustrates how even the most successful people can face moments of complete despair, and how love, even complicated love, can literally save lives. The incident also demonstrates the importance of trusting instincts about people we care about. Ava's decision to call Frank that night, despite their terrible fight, was pure intuition that proved life-saving. Frank's story shows that mental health crises can affect anyone, regardless of fame, success, or talent. It also shows that these crises can be survived with help, support, and professional intervention. Most importantly, Frank's recovery and subsequent career renaissance prove that rock bottom can become the foundation for rebuilding an even stronger life. The man who nearly died in 1953 went on to create some of his greatest work in the following decades. Frank's experience reminds us that seeking help during mental health crises isn't weakness, it's courage. His willingness to work with therapists and address his depression helped him develop the emotional strength that sustained him through the rest of his life. Today, mental health resources and crisis intervention are more available than they were in 1953. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please reach out to crisis hotlines, mental health professionals, or trusted friends and family members. Frank Sinatra's darkest night became the beginning of his greatest comeback, proving that even when everything seems hopeless, tomorrow can bring unexpected possibilities for healing, growth, and redemption. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that mental health struggles are survivable, that asking for help is strength, and that the people who love us can sometimes see danger before we recognize it ourselves. Have you ever had an instinct about someone's well-being that led you to reach out? Let us know in the comments about the importance of checking on the people we care about, especially during difficult